Hello everyone and welcome to Tea Time with Torloth. Today I'm talking about Mass Effect Andromeda, the cursed fourth game, forgotten and unloved. I was going to give Mass Effect a second chance after playing Mass Effect incredibly briefly on my Xbox 360 that was incredibly broken. So much so that the steel undercasing that you've probably never seen before had to be removed to change the games. I asked around to people who are fans of the series to see what game would be the best to play. And I was recommended against the first one since it's so rough and aged poorly. They said maybe wait for the legendary edition, but we're not going to do that. You might notice that my voice is not lining up with my face here. I had a massive issue with my audio in the video recording and it just sounds awful. So I'm voicing over it again in Resolve here, so enjoy that. But let's talk about Mass Effect Andromeda. Is it really as bad as everyone said it was? Is it ugly as it was? Well, ugly as it was, no. But I played it here and all footage you'll be seeing was recorded, from the Xbox Series X. So with all the enhancements that brings, it still looks nice though. That's for sure. But I'm gonna back up a bit and talk a bit about the basic plot. So humanity, or as the Wikipedia refers to it, the Council of Four Races plus another race that I'm not even gonna attempt to, 600 years ago decided to launch arcs containing about 20,000 of each race on a one-way trip to colonize Andromeda. Since most species wouldn't survive the trip, pioneers were cryogenically frozen to prevent spoiling and premature death. Upon reaching the Nexus, which is the landing space station for all the arcs, which are the giant spaceships, the only spaceship to make it was the humans' arc, and then none of the Golden Worlds were panning out that they scoped out from the Milky Way. So I mentioned the Nexus a second ago. It's the acting seat for government in Andromeda, like the Citadel in the Milky Way, a place I have also never been since I haven't played any of the other Mass Effect games. But that's okay. Now, most of the positions in the Nexus are filled by acting staff members, as several died in an accident before they even got to wake up. Then there was a revolt. This is all before the first arc shows up, with you, the first Pathfinder. Well, if you decide to play. Your job as player is to use your MacGuffin powers, given to you by your father just before he died, and the scene is good for the most part. I very much enjoyed that. Something was bothering me about this game. There was something in the back of my head the whole time I was playing it. Something felt so familiar, like I'd almost played this game before, but it wasn't the same setting. And then it hit me. Dragon Age Inquisition. In that game, you play as an Inquisitor with some sort of special power to close rifts, I believe it is, Demon World, but are appointed after something really bad happens. And then there's a half-hearted crafting system and an open world filled with almost nothing but samey quests. There was an interesting plot under everything, but I never finished it, just like I don't think I'm ever going to finish Mass Effect Andromeda. The two are so close. It's almost like they transplanted the base game from Dragon Age Inquisition right into Mass Effect Andromeda, and then let another team make it. Well, they worked on, what was that game again? They just pulled Anthem! Anthem, that's the game. I want to level with everyone. I didn't hate Dragon Age Inquisition, and I don't hate Mass Effect Andromeda. It's clear that a lot of work went into it, and there was a lot of grand ideas that just were not realized for one reason or another. But when it comes to BioWare and games that I know them for, and games that I love by them, the games that come to mind are Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Knights of the Old Republic. This is the BioWare I remember growing up, and it's the BioWare that I love. But this game feels kind of like a shell, like it's surface deep compared to some of the other ones. I'll explain. First of all, I love the crew. A lot of them are fun and have a ton of excellent voice acting, and their motivations are easy enough to follow. But I also feel like a lot of their personal quests are an afterthought. They lead to more story, but I can only drive around a wasteland so many times trying to find the right thing before it just becomes tedious. The main quest has a decent amount of agency with good use of station politics, but I have an issue with the way the dialogue system works here in Mass Effect Andromeda. Well, yes, there are several sections where you get choices, and your choices do indeed matter. I find most of the time the choices aren't the one I would make. For instance, after setting up a colony on a planet, the first one, I get to decide what sort of colony we set up. A scientific outpost or a military installation. I chose the scientific one because it just seemed like the smarter thing to do. Since it was the first one, my family and I decided that it would make more sense if we started a scientific base to prove that we're on a mission of peace and not a mission of war. Get back to the Nexus, and there are people picketing hydroponics. Hydroponics is clearly a place that is very important for oxygen and food production, and they want their families unthawed. They've been in cryosleep way too long, and because of the decision I made on Eos, the first planet, they've been separated from their families, and they just want them unfrozen. And they're saying how it was my choice, I did it on purpose, and all sorts of things. And I'm like, okay, I'll talk to them. So an emergency meeting is held, and you have the head of security, the acting director, and the director of immigration. Basically, the person decides who gets thawed out and who doesn't. The choice boils down to you side with everyone else in that the protest must be broken up and they're in the wrong, or the protesters are in the right and you're going to unthaw them. See, in that situation, you'd have to come up with some sort of middle ground because you don't have the resources to feed everyone. Otherwise, everyone would be unfrozen and you wouldn't even have this issue. You'd have other issues. But because they're protesting, and they were protesting in hydroponics and needed to be removed, I decided to side with the protesters because putting them under lock and key would just cause another mutiny. Something you don't want to happen. It already happened. But I feel like a good leader would come up with some sort of compromise. To be like, to sit them down and be like, hey, we see what you want. We can't give you that right now without there being compromises. I know you're worried about your family. We're all worried about our families. And there are people frozen on ships waiting to be able to be thawed out. It just felt like it's not a yes or no answer. It's not an easy thing to do. And there's a lot of half-hearted answers, or the answer goes one way or the other. The RPG section of the game and choices mattering is kind of skin deep. Yes, the security officer was mad that Apex Squad had to eat less food or have less resources because of the decision I made. It feels so ham-fisted to make the player decide the entire thing. But let's talk about traversal for a second. Traversal is good and comes in three major varieties. The first being the ship, the Tempest. It lets you move from planet to planet and lets you scan things when you're out in space so you can find things like ore or other things available. Get some research points, learn about the galaxy a bit. The second level comes in the Nomad, I believe it is called. 6-wheeled all-terrain vehicle used for traveling through the open world. And then you have, finally, the Quick Dash or Jet Boost, I believe it is called. If I'm being honest, this is an excellent use of traversal mechanics on foot. Lets you jump really high. Most things are not an obstacle. It's very nice. For the sake of this video, I went back and I played some of Anthem, played the opening. I realized that these mechanics were taken straight from Mass Effect Andromeda and refined upon for the final game of Anthem. And well, Anthem is basically a dead game at this point. I believe there's a lot of cross DNA with Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. Let's talk about combat. Combat is one of the things that annoys me the most. This game. It's probably the lowest point of the game, but it's also done the most. The first thing that's very annoying is your squad mates. They're basically useless. Sure, they shoot at things and they attack things, but I found a lot of the time they'd block my shots get in the way, get stuck on things, or put themselves into super dangerous situations. And when I tried to tell them to stay somewhere and hold a position, they would bugger off and do something else anyway. The combat pause from Dragon Age Inquisition is sorely missed here. It would be something that would just improve combat that much more and let me be more strategic. Whereas the combat, the way it is here in Mass Effect Andromeda, is just a bad third-person shooter. The shooting portion is fine, but again, it's a big part of Mass Effect Andromeda. You have normal weapons like assault rifles, sniper rifles, SMGs, and there's class powers, like this weird sort of repulsor grenade that fires off your rifle, and thermal and other sorts of abilities. But as I was playing through Mass Effect, something bothered me. There's no diplomacy. You can't be diplomatic with the cat at all. They're just an enemy to be killed. It's very simple. There's good guys and bad guys, and the cat are the bad guys. You can't negotiate with them at all. And your first run-in with Archon, I believe is the name, you barely get any options. And for the most part, they're just an aggressive one and a not so aggressive one. I almost feel like I was playing a cover shooter in an RPG's clothing. See, I remember playing Baldur's Gate in 1999 or whenever it came out, and fighting was always the last resort. It was something you could avoid for as long as possible. Sometimes it would be unavoidable, and you would want combat skills for that. But the RPG mechanics, with the leveling up and skill mechanics, have zero diplomatic conversation, bartering, none of that. All stripped out. There's no skill checks for anything. You can't get bonus money for having better charisma or something like that. It doesn't happen in this game. I don't understand why all the interesting RPG mechanics were cut out. They seem like a staple of most BioWare games. But then I remembered something when I went back to the main menu, when I went back in to record footage. You see, Mass Effect Andromeda also has a multiplayer mode. Sure, it could exist in any other game, and there are still people playing this multiplayer mode. I was honestly surprised. I thought there would be no one left playing it 4 years later, but there are. And when it comes to multiplayer modes, I might be a little hard to please. But I'm going to look at things positively for a second. Like I said, I'm playing on Xbox Series X here. People are still playing the multiplayer here on Mass Effect Andromeda. And I did get some footage of it. It's not horrible. From what I can tell, since there's no lobby viewer, it is a 7-wave horde mode where objectives change every wave. Get the data, kill all the enemies, survive. And again, it's not completely awful. There's nothing terrible about it, but it is very bland and mediocre. It almost feels like a waste of development time on a game that could have been so much more. But you can still buy Andromeda points and put them into loot boxes. So I asked the question before, is Mass Effect Andromeda as bad as everyone said it was? I looked over the reviews, and honestly, the professional ones ranged from completely glowing and perfect scores to middling to mediocre reviews, everywhere in between. Is the game perfect? Definitely not. Is the game awful? No, I think there's a bunch here. There is a lot here that could be good, and if you can work through some of the more tedious and boring parts of it, then maybe you could get something good out of it. I've heard the loading times are a definite problem on last gen machines. Let's just call them last gen machines. And honestly, I believe them. The unskippable cutscene for taking off from a planet is dreadful. And considering how fast the Xbox Series X is and how well it plays the game and how short some of the loading times are, I would not be surprised if they were horrendous on the Xbox One and One X. Like I said, the open world is almost devoid of anything interesting. And it feels like this game's trying to be too many things at once. It's trying to be a third-person cover shooter. It's trying to be a Mass Effect game with a deep and meaningful story and RPG mechanics. It's trying to be an open world game with collection and crafting. And it's trying to be a microtransaction cash cow. And for the most part, from what I can tell, it fails at most of those things. Compelling RPG, it's okay at best. A fantastical third-person shooter, it's okay at best. I know this is 4 years after release, and everyone's probably said their piece about the game. Well, I don't feel it's terrible. I do feel like there are issues with it. And the issues were moved on and given to Anthem. Anthem, being the game that it is, it's not awful. It has a shiny, beautiful world with fantastic movement, great animation work, but the gameplay is boring. I feel like Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem are the two worst games the studio's ever made. And yes, some of the other ones were middling, but this is the darkest time for BioWare. And honestly, I've been surprised up till now that the studio hasn't been dismantled for parts by EA, just like they did to Visceral. I'm always very suspicious of EA and their promises. The promise of Dragon Age 4 and a new Mass Effect are on the horizon. I don't know how excited I am for either. I'm not a huge fan of either game. The only reason I even tried them was because they're on EA Play, which is included in my Game Pass subscription. And I honestly wanted to give Mass Effect a real shot because I've heard very good things. People go on all the time about how good a game Mass Effect is. And Andromeda, as I knew before I even played the game, it was the black sheep. There's definitely hints of something great inside of it. But I think I beat a dead horse long enough. That's it for me this week. Thank you for watching all the way to the end if you did. And please consider subscribing so you know whenever I drop a new video, which is usually Saturday. If you're looking for something else to watch with weird opinions and a stupid thumbnail, check out my Hivebusters video. But until next time, matane!